The trouble with taxes. So what stirred up the hornet's nest in the first place? It all began over money and the rights of the citizens, too. Great Britain had been in a war or another for 50 years and was drowning in debt. Over in London, Parliament decided that the Americans should help out by paying their fair share, and King George agreed. After all, Great Britain had spent plenty of money fighting in America for the good of the colonies. The Crown was still supporting a British army to help stop the Indians' attack on the American frontier. It was Great Britain's right to collect a payment. To raise money, the Parliament passed a Sugar Act and a Stamp Act, saying that the colonists had to pay taxes to Great Britain for all sorts of imported goods, from molasses to blue indigo dye and pimentos to printed items such as marriage license, playing cards, and newspapers. Similar taxes were often collected in England, but the colonists were already paying separate taxes to cover their own war debts and run the colonies. A lot of them thought paying twice wasn't one bit fair. Besides, they believed it was against the British Constitution. Ever since the Middle Ages, English law had said there should be no taxation without representation. This meant that colonists could never be taxed unless their elected representative voted to pay. The colonists were British citizens, and the law guaranteed them the rights of the Englishmen. So where was their right to have representatives who could vote for or against these taxes? Though many colonists would stay loyal to the Crown and obey its laws no matter what, others argued that the Parliament might make them pay even more taxes without their consent. Many colonial merchants refused to buy British goods. Pamphlet writers roared. Preachers thundered from their pulpits. Angry members of an organization called the Sons of Liberty stripped royal office holders naked and covered them with hot tar and goose feathers. They used to tar and feather folks in Great Britain, too, in those days. These are no sons of liberty, they are sons of violence. A mob completely wrecked the home of the royal governor of Massachusetts. A straw dummy dressed to look like a stamp distributor was hung from a 120-year-old elm tree. And the British stamp acts that Americans were supposed to buy were burned in every colony. I'm more and more grieved at the accounts of America. It is undoubtedly the most serious matter that ever came before the Parliament. King George. By the time the Stamp Act was supposed to go into effect in November of 1765, flags were being flown at half-mast to mourn the death of liberty. Nobody in America would even distribute stamps. 4 months later, hoping to restore peace, the Parliament finally gave in and got rid of the hated taxes. This troubled King George, who thought the taxes were fair, but he signed the repeal anyway. British merchants were delighted to get their lost customers back, and all of America celebrated. Well, the story could have ended right there, but of course it didn't. To show they weren't afraid of the taxes, Parliament started demanding even more taxes. Patriot leaders in Massachusetts and Virginia made polite protest to the king, but the politeness did not help one bit. King George believed that the God gave the nobleman the divine right to rule, and the colonists had the duty to obey. But the British stubbornly informed legislators in both colonies that they couldn't have any more meetings. So the colonists stopped trying to be polite. The Virginians, including George Washington, met anyway and banned the sale of the items taxed by Great Britain. Colonists smuggled into untaxed goods from other countries, which was illegal, and they made lots of their own goods instead of buying British ones. A women's group called the Daughters of Liberty supported the cause by weaving their own cloth and making their own ball gowns, and brewing their own Liberty tea out of sassafras flowers. King George was sure that the gentlemen who pretend to be patriots in Massachusetts were no more than criminals, so he sent a fleet of warships to Boston to make them behave. 700 soldiers wearing fancy uniforms soon paraded up and down Boston streets with muskets on their shoulders. Whenever they were off duty, many stole, got drunk, and chased women. Some also infuriated worshippers by purposely racing horses, beating drums, and gambling under the church windows on Sundays. In March 1770, an angry mob of American rowdies started taunting King George's soldiers and pelting them with icy snowballs. Then someone threw a lump of wood at a redcoat and knocked him flat. The enraged troops began firing into the crowd, and 5 colonists were killed. Furious, the Sons of Liberty were quick to label this disaster as the Boston Massacre, and it stirred up plenty of anger on both sides.